It's one of those so goofy, you're playing Sam Gideon, who's this macho man, ex-football player, and wearing this insane, probably multi-billion-dollar suit. But one of the tactics I'm going to use is a cigarette. Sure.
This is why you should play Vanquish. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Why You Should Play. I was able to recruit, blackmail, maybe even seduce a very special guest for this episode for a very specific reason, meaning this game that I wanted to cover and discuss. My guest today, I always work on intros for every guest on my show to try to fluff them up. It really wasn't difficult for today's guest because I think he's had more professional titles than I think enough for a Game of Thrones character, honestly. He is, first and foremost, close to my heart. He is a one-time brewer of beer and a speakeasy owner. He has been a mayor. And most recently, he is the host of the wonderful Handsome Phantom podcast. He is the associate editor of Last Stand Media, one of the largest video game-related podcast networks in the world. He is also an associate producer for Lily Mo Games, who have produced such wonderful titles as Habroxia 2, which I am a huge fan of. Please welcome Ben Smith. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for that wonderful intro. I'm a little put off because in the intro you said you may have had to seduce me, and I didn't feel like I was getting seduced, and I wanted to feel that a little bit more. So I don't know if that means you need to work on your seduction levels or not, but yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'll have to grind a little bit and upgrade my stats, if you will.
Yeah, like in Skyrim, how you upgrade, you get sneak 100. You need to get seduce at least up to 40.
Yeah, sure. I would say generally, even in real life, I'm a non-confrontational person. So I know even in those types of games, I try to lean towards talking my way out of stuff because,
yeah,
combat is messy. So
right.
But
understandable.
yeah, thank you. Was there anything that I missed?
Yeah, almost definitely, but it's totally fine. I'm a man of many hats, and I when people ask me what I do, I'm just like, I work from home, and then they don't ask any more questions, and that's usually just easier than trying to tell them anything else. So
yeah, that's a good point. Work from home, people don't ask questions because they don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So how I like to start every episode is kind of a soft opening with what you've been playing, very briefly, not too time consuming. Maybe kind of open people's eyes to other games.
Sure. So the main things I've been playing over the last couple weeks, I finished up Final Fantasy 16, which is a wonderful, absolutely wonderful, delightful game. It was my first game back in the Final Fantasy universe, which of course they're all disconnected, but the first game back since 7 fully. I played 7 Remake, so it's been a few years for me. So I played Final Fantasy 16, absolutely spectacular game. And also I've been playing a little indie game that's doing quite well right now called Dave the Diver, a fantastic game where you dive during the day and then you run a sushi restaurant in the evening. And that's been way more fun than I could have anticipated. I've just been sinking my teeth into it. It's got a lot of RPG elements, very, very much charm in that game. And then the probably the only other thing that I've played recently is they came out with the new Monkey Islands expansion for Sea of Thieves. So there was a little story element, and they'll have a couple of those over the next few months. And so I hopped into that, and that transported me back about 30 years to the old days of PC point-and-click adventure games, which, if you're nostalgic at all for that time, was fantastic. I would imagine that going back and actually playing those games now would not be as fun, but certainly transported me to a different time.
For sure. Yeah, and I've heard multiple people mention that Dave the Diver, and I find those type of games so fascinating. And when I say those type of games, I mean really mashup of two disparate genres that really aren't necessarily cross with one another. You have like you said, the restaurant management sim sort of aspect, and then the other part of the game, they actually going down and collecting the resources. So, but I mean, it makes sense with the kind of the world that's being built in the game. It's just very, very cool. And
Yeah,
yeah, that one's definitely on my radar. In terms of what I've been playing, there's another game coming up that's going to be the next episode for my podcast. I don't want to reveal yet, but I will
sure.
say that it is a testament. I think what really makes a great game great is that it does stand the test of time.
Oh yeah,
In this game, obviously, the game we're going to discuss today, Vanquish, does to some degree, but the other game that I'm playing right now, it's much older, and it's just going back in time. And sometimes when you play an older game, you're always afraid of, does this hold up? Is there going to be weaknesses to it? And this game, for the most part, it's just really exquisite. Besides that, I've been playing a little indie game called Diablo 4, which
oh okay, yeah.
I hopped back into that. Very, very satisfying. I haven't picked it back up since the recent update or patch, which has supposedly just completely ruined the game and it's garbage now.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Of course,
gamers do be upset. But
it's got to be either the best or the worst. There's no in between with us gamers.
yeah, you have to package things into a binary. That's the only way to really, really critically think about things. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's pretty much what I've been playing. I've been kind of looking around for. Right now, we're into late July. I'm kind of curious about Baldur's Gate 3. I just don't know if I want to dive into a game like that because I've played a little bit of Divinity Original Sin 2. Those are very, very involved RPGs
Yes.
for those who aren't familiar. But I'm kind of, right now, I'm kind of in the quiet before the Starfield storm right
Yeah,
now.
dude.
You can feel it. Like you kind of think that like review codes are maybe going to start going out soon in the next few weeks. It's going to start gearing up. But yeah, I'm going to be looking to play some shorter games to kind of whet my appetite a little bit. But if you can believe this, Ben, I've only done 3 episodes and I'm already getting audience pushback. Can you imagine that, getting audience pushback on a podcast for podcast content? Did you?
As a man who's been doing podcasts for about 15 years
Ah,
now, it's just unbelievable to me that anyone would ever argue with you about anything.
I know. Can you imagine, like, the higher fans that can do a better job? So,
Yes.
but one segment that I do want to make a regular feature of this podcast is, why did I pick the games?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times picking the guest is obvious, right? Like the guest usually has a long history with the game. They're an ardent proponent of it. They're a diehard fan of it. It's like, why did I pick Vanquish? I'm thinking, one, obviously I had it recommended to me by numerous people, and the people that did recommend it just absolutely adore it. And another aspect is, I think what really put me over the top is there's this developer called PlatinumGames,
Mm.
and they unfortunately have been the butt of many of a joke of late recently. I think most recently their biggest was it Babylon's Fall. See, I can't even remember these generic names that just kind of come and go. It was Babylon's Fall, correct? Was there?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I remember playing the demo for that game. I'm like, God, this is just so boring and generic. It may as well have been like kind of something that Square Enix released. Honestly, like one of those kind of generic games that they churn out. And I'm like, man, I wanted to go back and remember when Platinum was just like, what is one of the quintessential platinum games, because obviously they've done Nier Automata, which is one of the games of its generation. Many feel one of the best games of all time, but I don't consider that a traditional prototypical quintessential platinum game. And when I look at Vanquish, I'm like, yeah, this is what I think of when I think of a platinum game. And kind of they also did Metal Gear Rising as well,
Yeah.
correct?
I believe
Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah.
yeah, I think those are like the 2 most platinum, kind of capital P platinum games, or the high octane, silly, ridiculous stories and tone, and just absolute joy from beginning to end. And with Vanquish, I did a little time travel backwards, and I'm like, why did this game, like, it seemed like it didn't really sell well, just kind of came and went. And so I looked at that year in 2010, and I'm like, oh, it released on the same day as a little game called Fallout New Vegas. It released, I think, around the same time as the Red Dead Redemption DLC Undead Nightmare, which was excellent. I mean, the game itself was amazing, and they just tacked on an amazing DLC. And soon after Vanquish released was Force Unleashed 2, which was a big game and kind of a similar high-octane sort of action-adventure game. What put me over the top to playing this game was your video on it. And I'm like, okay, I don't know why I didn't play this game, but I really do have to play it. So I think that it is the perfect sort of game candidate for this podcast.
Yeah.
It's not overly long. I think it's like 6, maybe 8 hours tops if you're going to be really deliberate or you're really, really bad at the game. I think I was just under 6 hours. So feeding into that, what is your story originally with the game? How did you come to discover it and fall in love with it?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll say it's funny you mentioned Platinum and also Square Enix, because I think that as far as Babylon's Fall goes, Platinum made the game, but Square Enix published it. So you
Well,
talk about those kind of like
That's
low
why.
budget, Platinum games. That was one of them for sure that Square Enix participated in. But as far as Vanquish, So back in 2010, when this game came out, I was running a website. We were getting like review codes, and I had my eye on the game, but it was kind of one of those things where I was like, I'm just gonna ask for a review code and hopefully get to play it and review it. But whatever, the day came and went, and there wasn't any. And at the time, there was a program that Kmart was running. Yes, Kmart had a gaming program, believe it or not. Basically, if you bought a new game, you got I think it was a $10 or a $20 credit towards another game. I can't remember exactly. And I had a few of those saved up and they were expiring. And so I was like, well, what's out? So I went and looked at like the new releases section at Kmart. And I think I got this game, whatever the price was, I think I got it for half off back on the Xbox 360. And so I was just like, well, yeah, I'm going to play this game. So I got the game. I got home. I opened it. I threw it in. And about 5 minutes later, I got an email with a code from Platinum's PR team. So I think I ended up just giving that to another member of the team. But that's basically how it was. Kind of like I kind of had my eye on it from seeing the shows. But like you mentioned, there was a lot of other stuff. I had already played New Vegas. I played it 3 weeks early. So that was cool. And I was in a fortunate position. But for a lot of people, they had a bunch of other stuff to play. But for me, fortunately, I already had played many of those things early. And that was, again, a fortunate position that not everybody had. So it hit at the right time for me, where there were all these other big games that I had already finished, and I just needed something else to play. I was a single guy at the time, living in an apartment or a duplex with a couple other dudes, working our first jobs out of college, and Vanquish just hit. I think another reason you mentioned why it didn't do as well is a strength for me, actually, is the fact that it's 6 to 8 hours long. That was a big time in the industry when everybody was very much focused in on gameplay length compared to game price. And especially when you get a game like New Vegas coming out, where you've got dozens and dozens of hours you can sink into that. I mean, honestly, you could sink hundreds of hours into that game if you really wanted to. It just wasn't everybody's cup of tea at the time. But for me, that's exactly what I wanted.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a really good point as well. And I think another aspect, maybe you highlighted this in your video, as I think Platinum at that point was still somewhat unknown. I mean, I think they had just recently done Bayonetta, I believe, the year before. But yeah, this was not like the Nier Automata, Metal Gear Rising, Wonderful 101. Vanquish was where they sort of made themselves known, the kind of developer that they were. Yeah, unfortunately, like I said, it was sandwiched in between titles. I think, 2010 was an amazing year. I think Mass Effect 2 came out that year as well. So in the grand scheme of looking back on the entire year, it just got absolutely buried. It got a PC port, I believe, in, 2020? Like relatively recently, I believe, in the past few years. And I think that sort of had it, give it a second wind and a second life, is where I played the game on PC. And, it has some visual touch-ups, and I believe it has like an unlocked frame rate and some other things. But that's where I played the game. And, looking back, it's kind of crazy that it didn't do really well, because I mean, the game director is a man by the name of Shinji Mikami, who many people know as, he's the Resident Evil guy. And it's like, by the way, he just directed this absolute banger of an action adventure game that I think, honestly, early on in the game, I was like, this is kind of him doing a riff on Michael Bay, like the type of tone, the characters, everything. It is like someone made a Michael Bay video game, but it's very, very, very self-aware. And I think in a way that I don't quite think Michael Bay's movies are. That's the reason why I wanted to do it. Like, I couldn't believe it took me so long to get to this game. Here we are now recording this episode. I'm like, I would have never guessed that I would have played this game if not for, granted, it was way later, but it is word of mouth that people who spoke about this game, it is often among their favorite action adventure games. Third person shooting is just buttery smooth, which, we'll go into that a little bit later. But in terms of, I alluded to just a moment ago with the Michael Bay sort of tone, is the thing I wanted to dip into first with this game is the story, or what I have in my notes is the story of cheese. And I mean, right from the outset with this game, before you even really get into combat, it's kind of telling you like, okay, this is the kind of game that this is going to be. To start off, a gameplay element, really, which is kind of the brilliant aspect of it, is there is a cigarette smoking button in this game.
Yes.
The caveat is you have to be undercover, but you light up a cig and take it away. Go into a little bit more detail about this brilliant game mechanic.
So, I mean, yeah, it's basically a distraction technique. Not to get negative, but it doesn't really always work because you'll light up a cigarette, you smoke about a tenth of it, which is definitely a waste of money. I mean,
Yeah,
come on.
yeah,
And it's better for your health, but it's a waste of money. And then you toss it into the line of sight of an enemy, and it will sometimes distract them, and sometimes doesn't. I don't remember. It has been. I did play the PC port, but it's been a few years since I really, really dove into this game. If the cigarette has any other function, maybe you can refresh my memory on that. But it's one of those so goofy. You're playing Sam Gideon, who's this macho man ex-football player, and wearing this insane, probably multi-billion-dollar suit. But one of the tactics I'm going to use is a cigarette. Sure.
yeah, yeah. It really isn't. I don't think it. You had mentioned the distraction thing. I think that's. I don't think there's certain contextual requirements. I think it's maybe just RNG,
Yeah.
honestly, or
Yeah.
maybe there's an aggro element with the AI. But I just couldn't believe that because this game is obviously memeable and has so many gifs.
Right.
Usually involves smoking, but I'm like, oh my god, they actually made it a mechanic. That's actually it's another piece of evidence that they put actual thought into it.
Sure.
And like you said, it's not a Kojima thing. It's not a sim element. Like it's not gonna cost you anything on your health or any kind of adrenaline or stuff like that for Metal Gear Solid games. But it's amazing. And like you said, he rips so many heaters and cutscenes and everything. He takes like 2 puffs and got to get back to business.
He has to be carrying like 8 packs of cigarettes throughout the game on him because like he never goes to the store to refresh.
Yeah, I wonder if that was like a requirement for his suit. Maybe have a little have a few packets instead of like magazines for weapons. It's packs of cigarettes.
Right.
But yeah, to elaborate further on the cheese to give people an idea, because I mean the story is, it's a story like the Russians invade, which I think is what's really cracked me up looking back now in current times is the Russians are this big massive threat, and the president in this game is definitely not Hillary Clinton.
No, definitely not.
Totally, definitely not. Not the haircut, not the voice, not the dress. It's definitely not Hillary Clinton. Don't you dare for a second accuse her of being that. But yeah, and the Russians, they're extremely Russians. Like it's over the top accents. But again, it fits into the cheese and the tone of the game. And one of the first lines, I literally have it in my notes here, again, just to reinforce the cheese. One of the lines is, "Come on, you apes, you want to live forever," which is straight up a line from Starship Troopers. I mean, come on, guys. Like, it's just, I could not believe the amount of cheese. And like I said, it's across, you mentioned it earlier with Sam Gideon, who's the main character. I would say this, if I was to sort of compartmentalize it, it's a cross between a Michael Bay movie and the sort of Gears of War, I would say, machismo. Like, all the guys have just really, really gravelly voices and they talk like this. And yeah, it's like smokers who eat gravel for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just, and it's joyous, honestly. You can tell all the actors are having a grand old time.
Sure.
The other sort of main character is sort of your main companion is Burns, who is played by Steve Blum, who's like an all-time famous voice actor. And they're just chewing up the scenery, every scene from the next. So you can definitely tell that the actors had as much fun voicing it as I think the developers did playing it. So was there really anything else that you wanted to comment on in terms of the tone, what you remember of the game, any kind of sort of silly, memorable moments or story bits that you wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really funny, not to comment too much on like modern events, but it's so funny. We've always used the Russians as punching bags in stories. And granted, there was a time when they certainly deserved it. And then they got into this period of time when they really didn't. And, we were like, okay, well, maybe we're going to have to stop using Russians in video games. And then now they've kind of, once again, become the aggressors in the world. All right, the Russians, well, they're just the bad guys forever now. Sorry to do that to you, Russia, but you're just going to be forever the bad guys in all these stories. And that's honestly like the style of camp that this game has in it. I mean, they're fighting over a future. The story in this game is kind of confusing. And I think it was John Carmack who said that story in a video game is like story in a porn, where it doesn't really, people expect it to be there, but it's not that important. And I mean, I disagree with that obviously the story is so important to many games, but as far as this game, that's exactly what it is. And it works because, as we'll get into, the gameplay is so fun. But yeah, everything in this game is every bit of character commentary and every little bit of story bits that you get are there because they're supposed to be. But I don't think it detracts from the game at all. You get this picture of the larger world and like the cutscene at the very beginning of the game, and you get some updates as you go. But for the most part, it's just having good fun while you're smoking cigarettes and destroying bad guys. And for me, that's all I really need. And if the game is ridiculously fun, which it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's like we had mentioned, it's the self awareness aspect. Like it knows what it's doing. It knows the type of game it is. And you had mentioned the comment from John Carmack. For those of you many years younger audience, John Carmack is he is technically one of the creators of Doom, correct? A little franchise called Doom.
Yeah, before that, Wolfenstein. Well, he didn't.
Wolfenstein, yeah,
Sorry, he
Doom.
didn't create Wolfenstein, but he made the only Wolfenstein that people know as the original.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, he is like the godfathers of shooters as we know it. He is an absolute legend, and yeah, it's his porno reference was funny because the real story, if you will, of this game, I would say, is very front and back loaded. Like, he gives you a setup and a premise,
Yeah,
and then there's kind of the very end of the game, which I don't really want to spoil. The game
sure.
does
Yeah,
end on a cliffhanger, I would say, which is kind of unfortunate. I know. I don't think I would be shocked if we're ever going to get a Vanquish 2.
especially from Platinum.
Yeah, especially from Platinum. I don't know. I think people are always talking about, oh, do Scalebound. I'm like, just do a Vanquish 2. Like, no one, we don't
Right.
we don't need Scalebound. But this is not even to mention in terms of the cheese. This is not even to mention the boss battles in this game, which
Oh Lord,
we'll go into in terms of gameplay. But there is some absolute glorious cheese cutscene and quick time event moments in these boss battles that are just I could not believe what I was watching. It was just absolutely joyous. And again, for as relatively older of a game as it is, I mean, we're coming up on nearly 15 years ago.
yeah,
The cutscenes still look really good. They're still glorious, and yeah, it's just another perfect marriage of just cheese and gameplay elements that really make this game supremely entertaining from beginning to end. Doesn't
yeah.
overstay its welcome, and kind of touched on some gameplay elements. But the first thing that I wanted to really highlight with the gameplay, and we'll get more into the combat as well, is this game has a really good, efficient tutorial, and which I think you highlighted in your video on Vanquish as well. In that there's a very specific way to play this game, and the game teaches you it, but it has the confidence, because a lot of games I know they'll give you tutorial prompts like in the middle of a game, but this game is like, no,
Yeah,
we're going to give you a tutorial from the outset. It's going to be a very deliberate tutorial, but it's going to be fun because we have confidence enough in the game itself and the core gameplay elements that we're just going to teach you basically everything you need to know from the outset. That way we're not bombarding you with prompts and tutorials halfway through the game.
right.
And the tutorial is not long. I would say it's maybe 15 minutes tops, 10
Yeah,
minutes. And that's it. And you learn how to shoot, you learn how to slide, you learn how to throw a grenade, you learn how to do your overpower, your bullet time ability, basically, whatever they call it. I forget. But
I do too.
yeah. Do you recall anything specific about the tutorial that stood out to you?
Yeah, well, I'll say first that it is, in the scheme of things, relatively short. Like you said, maybe 15 minutes, depends. But it's so funny to go back. When I went back a couple of years ago and played that, I was like, wow, this is how a lot of games used to be. Not anytime recently, of course, because as you mentioned, a lot of times we're seeing tutorial prompts pop up as you're playing the game. Once you get into a situation where you need a new thing, they suddenly show you how to do that new thing. In this game, the first bit of gameplay you have is you're just in a enclosed room with like a simulation, and you're doing it. And I was just thinking about how the fact in our modern TikTok, YouTube short world, so many of us are like, I got to get to the action right now, and then teach me how to do it on the way. And this game, you're going to just stay here and learn how to play the game. And I imagine that would not go over terribly well. Like, a lot of people would be like, well, I didn't get past the tutorial because it was boring. Now, if you just handed them the game, but it isn't boring. It's basically telling you, or in order to be successful in playing this game, especially on the harder difficulties, you need to learn how to play it right now. There's no getting into the game. There really is no separating the mechanics from each other if you're going to be successful. You can't just stand there and shoot and then run up a little way and stand there. You have to be able to use the slide mechanics and the power shoot mechanics and the cover mechanics, and hey, even the cigarette mechanics. You got to be able to use those all in tandem in order to be able to play the game. And I think that that's probably not good game design from a modern perspective, but I think that it is the right method, because if you have mechanics that can be used apart from other ones, then what's the point? So it tells you exactly what you're going to do for the entire rest of the game in the first 15 minutes of it. And I think that that's really admirable, because you don't really get that anymore. And again, the game is basically telling you, like, if you don't know how to play the game now, well, you're not going to get very far. And you see that in the first couple little battles that you have, for sure.
Without a doubt. I think what it comes back to is the game is not overly long.
Right.
So if they really had introduced a new mechanic or a new ability like halfway through the game, you'd be like, what was the point for such a short game? But
right.
It clearly works for this game. It's all that stuff is front loaded. Get that sort of eat your vegetables, get them out of the way. Get to the delicious steak and potato and mac and cheese that is the core thrust of the campaign of this game. And I think what's funniest too is that the tutorial is, story lore wise, it is a literal training room devoted to the abilities of your suit. So It kind of does. They kind of do make it work in the universe of this game. And you kind of have your person in the chair, and of course, to continue the theme of the cheese and the machismo of this game, it's a very well-rounded, shall we say, blonde woman.
Yes.
Who's Russian. I mean, again, of course it is, because that's how it would be in like a Michael Bay movie,
right?
Or whatever.
Right.
So, yeah. So when you have an attractive blonde woman, giving you orders, and you're going to be, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. That's the gamers they're simple creatures.
Right.
What activates in their brain. So it definitely works for this game. I know in a lot of games, when I get a new ability, the last thing I want to do is stop the game to go into like one of those tutorial practice rooms. Oh, practice your new abilities on this game in the middle of like a 50-hour game, like Final Fantasy, 16, for example. Great game, but I did not want to go to like a training room to practice a new set of abilities that I got 30 hours into the game. So
yeah,
I think if the game had been longer, I would hope that they wouldn't have done that like in modern games. But no, I think it clearly works, and I kind of hope other games see that. I know, unfortunately, in this industry, developers learn the wrong lessons from successful games or creative games.
Yeah.
And yeah, it really adheres to the no nonsense approach that this game has. And so, yeah, moving forward out of the tutorial, you had mentioned it a moment ago. The main, the directly to the combat itself, it is a third-person shooter, and I really have to say, in terms of this game holding up, it is still some of the smoothest third-person shooting that I've ever felt in the game ever. I think,
yeah,
in a lot of third-person action games nowadays, unfortunately, your character is very like cumbersome, very clunky. Not in a over-the-top machismo sort of Gears of War way, but just like kind of you have cinder blocks for feet sort of way.
right.
And with this game, you wouldn't have been able to call it like a high-octane, insane action adventure game if you're like a Gears of War character. If you're rumbling along the ground. But take it away with the shooting, and you had mentioned the power sliding, if you will.
So you've got this suit. I think it's ARS, the augmented reaction suit. And there, again, that tutorial at the beginning there is teaching you how to use it and showing you exactly, what you need to do in order to use it. And the basics of the suit are that it acts as a little bit of armor, and it has like a power slide ability. And is it actually? I think it's actually called power sliding. I can't remember for sure, but you essentially have rockets strapped to your calves, and as you need to move around, you pop onto your knees, hit the rockets, and go. And the movement is straight out of a cartoon. I don't know if Bugs Bunny can move around more fluidly than you move around in this suit. So you're moving from cover to cover, and you have what is called the blade weapon system. And the way the blade weapon system works is if you see a new gun on the ground, you can scan it in, and your suit can hold up to, or your weapon system can hold up to 3 different types of weapons. And you just swap them out. So instead of carrying multiple guns, you're carrying one gun that essentially transforms into multiple types of guns. And that's really the main parts of your character, is that you have a suit where you can slide around, you can get from one spot to the next, go from cover to cover. You're not forced to stay in cover, but you certainly are encouraged to do so. And you go from cover to cover, and then you pull out the blade weapon and choose which weapon you want to shoot, and you shoot it. You blow up bad guys. And it's so fluid that I think the first time I played the game, it was probably halfway through it before I really realized that. I think it explains it to you in fairness, but that the blade weapon is one gun. I just thought I was swapping out guns quickly in an animation and didn't realize it. But no, it's because your weapon is transforming into different things, like, Michael Bay movie. And the cool thing about the blade weapon system is that anytime you approach a new weapon or a weapon at all, you can either choose to make it part of your weapon system, or you can absorb that. Like if it's one that you already have equipped, you absorb that and actually level up your gun. And I think we've seen things like that, in other games, but I don't know that anybody's ever done it in the same way. That instead of just, oh, that's a gun I already have, there's no point in me picking it up. Like every pickup is meaningful in some way. Either you're going to get a new weapon, or you're going to make the weapon you're already using a little bit more powerful. And getting ahead of myself a little bit, I think that if you die, you lose a level, but I can't 100% be sure on that. But the nice part is that you have a different array of things that's almost instantaneous to be able to use. There's no, animation to load it up, to switch it around, etc. I think that's the beauty of the blade weapon system. Like I said, I don't know that I've ever really seen anything else like it in modern gaming.
No, that is very true. I think there were some. I think as part of the enhancements for the PC port, I want to say in cutscenes it actually shows your gun having the actual assembly animation.
Oh, nice. Okay,
yeah. So it's sort of a little bit added layer of immersion. And yeah, you covered a lot of ground really well with the combat. In terms of the guns you're going to use, there's obviously a lot of machine guns, because machine gunning robots is just never will never get old in that game.
Absolutely.
You have a shotgun, you have rocket launcher, you even have a sniper rifle, which I was surprised is actually pretty viable.
Yeah.
Given the cover elements. The thing with the power sliding in the suit, they're kind of all part of your one suit's features. You have the armor and the sliding, and it's all geared toward this one meter or bar, and you can overheat it, which I did.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, numerous times. And it really does punish you for overheating. Like it's saying, hey, you cannot just power slide literally all over the map. You really have to you have to do this sort of specific dance. It reminds me, not exactly, or maybe necessarily a direct comparison, but it has like we alluded to, it has this very specific way that you need to play this game, similar to what like Returnal or Doom Eternal tells you, without giving you text to, hey, this is the way you play the game. It kind of teaches you with the enemies and the environments, hey, this is the very specific way we want you to play this game, because we're confident enough in the game that we made to do this. And so the game does throw other challenges at you. It has enemies that buff other enemies or automatically heal other enemies. The covers are destructible, so you can't just park yourself behind a single piece of cover.
Yes.
The enemies will eventually destroy it. So yeah, it does throw these things at you that are not just, hey, we're going to make the enemies more tanky, which I cannot stand in a game. I despise that. Another element too, what really stuck out to me with the game is how quickly you go from power sliding to cover. It is just literally like a snap in the blink of an eye. There's no animation. It is just instantaneous. It literally is like you're snapping to the cover from sliding.
Right.
And it was really almost always reliable. I know in past games, cover systems were still kind of being refined and developed, but this game was instantaneous and so smooth and responsive. I couldn't believe how seamless it was. And yeah, another aspect of the combat as well, which I'll get to more into the caveats, is you do have grenades as well. You have traditional frag grenades, and you also have the EMP grenades.
Yeah.
Which the EMP grenades are really useful because you're fighting, mechanized enemies, and it just basically just shuts them down for a period of, I think, 5 seconds or so. There's also, with the combat, there's boss battles, which again, I don't think you would want to either. I don't want to spoil them.
No.
They're just the scope and scale of the boss battles, I was just astonished by. I couldn't believe it. I got taken aback by the scope and scale of some of them. And it's not like, there's a couple of boss battles where it's like, hey, the boss is kind of part of a skybox and it's directly in front of you. But there's also some where you have to maneuver around this giant boss, power slide around it to get to certain sides of the boss, weak points, etc. So just really, really well done. And one other sort of aspect about the combat that I really appreciated was it does sort of have its own bullet time system, if you will. I don't know. I don't know if that's what they call it. I think they have a
I
specific name
think
for
it's
it, but it's for all
AR
intents.
mode, something like that. I don't
Yeah, I
remember
think
what
that
it
sounds
stands
right.
for.
Yeah, but it's for all intents and purposes, it's bullet time. I know
Yeah.
that's what people in the industry have commonly referred to it as. It is basically a slow mo where you can really do damage. It's really useful for bosses and or other enemies that move really, really fast around the map. Because again, this game does throw a lot of enemy variety at you. Again, it's impressive for a 2010 game
Yeah.
how it does that.
Well, I was just going to say, you mentioned how like the cover is destructible. And I remember at the time, obviously this comparison doesn't hold up very well anymore, but Battlefield Bad Company 2 had come out earlier that year, maybe the year before. I think it was earlier that year, 2010. And I remember making the comparison that it's got destructible environments, just like Battlefield Bad Company 2. And of course, it's not like that. But yeah, it does penalize you for that. And then the other thing that the game kind of penalizes you for, and I don't think it really ever tells you this, but like the sliding mechanic, the boost mechanic, like you said, you can't just like do it infinitely around the map. Really, if you're not using it appropriately, the ability to slide around depletes and your sliding becomes less effective and you do move a little bit slower. And so I think that's cool how the game like gives you all these tools that makes you feel overpowered, but it doesn't let you abuse them. You still have to use them in moderation. The cover, it's perfect, it's great, but if you stay there too long, you're still going to die. And the sliding, nothing has ever felt as good as the sliding in Vanquish, at least up to that point that I can think of, and maybe even since. But if you use the sliding too much, you're also kind of screwed, and your gauge goes down and everything. So they give you a reward for doing it well, and they punish you for doing it poorly. And I don't feel like we get a lot of games that know how to play a game anymore. Like it's like, well, a lot of things are very forgiving. This game, yeah, I guess it's a little forgiving. I mean, some of the battles are pretty tough, but you have to know how to use the things, which again goes back to the beauty of the tutorial being at the beginning of the game.
You highlighted this in your video on the game, is that when you start out as this just over the top, super powered guy with all these different abilities, you're proficient with all these weapons, the game should throw a good amount of challenge at you. It would be, it would be boring if it was just a strict sort of Gears of War style cover shooter. That wouldn't work well. I mean, enemies are aggressive, they'll flank you, they'll throw grenades at you. They're very, very unrelenting. They're basically telling you, hey, you have to move, you have to get out from cover, you have to slide. And one thing I forgot to, I think you touched on it with AR mode. When your suit overheats, you automatically go into the AR mode for a few seconds, but when you're out of it, the cooldown is pretty punishing.
Yeah.
I want to say it's like 6 seconds.
Yeah.
As I referenced earlier, you do actually get into that sort of Gears of War mode. You are very, very slow. Even by normal human standards, it's like you're literally exhausted.
Right.
You're basically DOA. I played this on the normal difficulties, and I would imagine on harder difficulties, if you even get into that cooldown mode, you are basically DOA. Any other aspects of the gameplay or combat that I want to get in? What do you remember what your favorite weapons were to use?
Oh no, not a chance. Not by
No.
name, at least. I mean, obviously,
Not by name.
I like the shotgun because
The shotgun was surprisingly good.
yeah, I feel like with the zooming around so much, you're able to use the suit to do the sliding and everything. You can get right up into an enemy's face and just blast them. And I don't remember names or anything specific. I think I had the same reaction as you with the sniper rifle, thinking that like I didn't expect a game where you're moving around so much to have an incredibly far ranged weapon, but it hits nice. It makes everything feel really nice because you're just you're picking off the bad guys. You move into another piece of cover with pull out a different weapon, and then you're right up in their face and can just blast them with a shotgun. And everything is fluid, regardless of what the weapons are called. I guess it's just that like every weapon seems to have its place.
Yeah, like each weapon has, I think it has its own in-universe sort of code name. The sniper rifle is appropriately powerful. I mean, you get a headshot with a sniper rifle on like 90% of enemies and they're one shot killed. The shotgun is pretty satisfying and powerful. And even though there is a specific sort of dance, if you will, to the game, there are subtly different approaches to combat. Like you said, you can zip around and do the shotgun. You can zip around from cover to cover with the sniper rifle. What honestly surprised me, I just remembered this, is there is a stronger pistol that is another sort of one-shot kill that I was really, really impressed by, and one of my favorite weapons in the game.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, we're not going to spoil the boss battles, is for boss battles, you will definitely want those EMP grenades and you will want the rocket launcher.
Yeah.
It is sort of, I mean, Shinji Mikami, it's like, and again, it's maybe not necessarily something unique, but hey, you want the rocket launcher for the boss battles. It's like a Resident Evil game, right? It's like, hey, just bust out the rocket launcher and kill them. And yeah, I think that was for the most part everything I wanted to cover with the gameplay and the combat. Without, again, I don't want to spoil things because I want people to
Yeah.
play this game. Looking back on the game, was there anything else that you wanted to discuss? If you had any notes on your end beforehand, we'll make sure I didn't want to leave anything
Yeah,
out.
I would say, I mean, I guess we both did kind of downplayed the story part of it earlier. And I was thinking about that a little more as we were talking. And even though I still stick to that mostly, that the story isn't that great, there is a lot of interesting stuff in it. I mean, obviously, you get that like world perspective of how different nations are battling over a finite resource and a specific tool to harness that resource. But you're also getting like a little bit of, you get some deception, you get some friendship building. Like you mentioned, you get that cliffhanger. There's a lot of story there. I just don't know that there's a lot of nuance. So I wanted to say, like, if you're at all concerned about that, there is a good story there. It's just not the point of the game, in my opinion. Like, the game is about having fun, feeling fluid, being fast and powerful. Like any game that just makes you feel like a total boss, to me, is awesome. And the story, story is not as important, but it's certainly important, and I think it's there. It's just an older style. It's very arcadey in one sense, and very heavy and dramatic in another sense. So I think that's the biggest thing I wanted to bring up. There is story there. It's just not the forefront.
No, yeah, definitely not. It is, like I said, it's very front and back loaded, and you get some little tidbits in between levels. I think the game is 5 or 6 acts. There's usually 5 or 6 chapters within each act,
Yeah.
and they have these sort of weird. You go into first person mode, like a very slow walking first person
Oh
mode.
man, I forgot about
In
that.
between. Yeah, it's very very weird. I'm like, okay, they weren't too long. They're like maybe I think like 30 seconds tops,
Yeah.
but they are a little bit jarring. And I will say, overall, what the overall aesthetic of the world is very cool. It's a sort of, I would say, it's definitely a sci-fi world. It takes place in the United States. I mean, it starts with San Francisco
Sure.
getting attacked, which I mean, many people nowadays would say, good riddance,
Right.
all the
Yeah.
better. But yeah, it does sort of have this. The overall vibe of the area and the world is very sort of futuristic. I would say utopia. It obviously gets plunged into war and conflict, but it does have this sort of that meme of the like ideal society. There's a giant monorail. Vehicles are zipping around, very technological.
Yeah.
The world itself is very cool. The overall design. I mean, Sam's your main player character's suit is very cool. They do have this sort of generic Marines that are very like I think they're kind of straight out of Halo. Honestly,
Yeah.
the
They're not
robots
very
that you
smart.
fight.
That's for sure.
No. They're basically like red shirts from Star Trek. But what stuck out to me too is a lot of the basic enemies that you fight. The overall design of them looks like elites from Halo, like the way their armor is contoured and shaped. That's really what stuck out to me. I kind of go back, because this game obviously had its time and place. So I kind of try to look back at what were some little inspirations for this game and some things that reminded me. I mean, there's a not to really spoil, but there's like a monorail train sequence in the game that kind of reminded me a little bit of Gears of War.
Mm-hmm.
But no, yeah, I think we kind of run the gamut of everything in terms of the combat and gameplay. There's a couple of caveats involved in that, which I'll get to later on. I think what impressed me as well is the level of variety. Again, without going into spoilers, there's on rail sections. Oh, and you can take over mounted turrets as well, which again is another added element to the gameplay. You're zipping around on these rocket boots, rocket legs. You can mount things.
Rocket calves.
Yeah, rocket calves, rocket heels, rocket legs, everything. I'm trying to think. I can't think of anything else. Oh, there is one sequence that stood out to me that was very impressive. I will say, it was very much like a sci-fi D-Day level where you are literally going uphill, advancing on bunkers, and I'm like, wow, they just really just made up like a straight up D-Day level in this game. Very, very impressive. I love talking about a game where I grow even more fond of the game, even though I just recently played it, but I'm talking about it more. Sort of the last section of every episode is what I call caveats. And this is an episode of why you should play the game, but I do want to not just completely pump it full of ultraviolet sunshine rays.
Sure.
I want to add some qualifiers. That's why I call them caveats. I don't want to say downsides or negatives. But one thing that I do have for the gameplay of this game is grenade throwing is the grenades are very, very floaty.
Uh-huh.
And I want to tell people that I don't think you're meant to throw the grenades in terms of just strictly throwing them at a point on the ground and doing AoE damage. I think what you're really supposed to do with the grenades is you're supposed to shoot them in midair,
Yep.
which you can do in the game is amazing. It took me an embarrassingly long amount of time to figure that out. When you throw an EMP grenade to a group of enemies, you're really meant to shoot it to really maximize that area of effect. And the same with the frag grenades as well. Like I was able to do it traditionally, with just throwing them on the ground and getting the job done that way. But that's one qualifier I have for the is the grenade throwing in the game. Do you agree?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I would say that is a downfall of the tutorial, is it doesn't really teach you that shooting them in the air. I think the first time I ever did it, I don't remember the first time I played the game, but most recent time I played the game, when I did it, I didn't do it on purpose. I like threw a grenade and then just started shooting and blew it up. I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So that's definitely something that I think could have been better conveyed. But did you like, kind of an aside, but not really, how Sam throws the grenades? Did you notice that?
Yes.
I mean, he throws them like a football player. Like,
yeah,
it's just a perfect. It's again that little bit of storytelling in the game that isn't that important in this game, but it adds a lot to it still.
Yeah. It's not exactly the way they teach you in the military with your arm fully extended and kind of lobbing it, right? He does like you said, he does the football star. It was almost like a baseball pitcher's windup as well, where he honestly just chucks it. That's the best way to really phrase it. And again, it's like you said, there's those sort of subtle storytelling and character informative elements to the game. That's there is a charm to the animation as well. Like he really just kind of flails around and just chucks it with his upper arm. It's very, very funny. Another portion of the game is there is a sort of stealth on rails section level in this game that I wasn't too crazy about. It kind of comes out of nowhere, and I think kind of goes against the entire ethos of the game. I really felt like it could have been switched up or maybe even removed, and it felt like they already had an on-rail section, and they're like, oh, we don't want to do another high-octane on-rail section, which I would have totally been down for. There is one, now that I think of it, there is one on-rails section specifically that I don't want to spoil, but let's just say that it plays with perspective in a really awesome and impressive way. Yeah, it's really, but to 90% of the game, 95% of the game is this really high-octane, insane, but there is this one on-rail section. It's not overly long. I want to say it's like 5 minutes, but it's at night, and you have to use a silent sniper rifle to shoot cameras and spotlights. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, this is just so boring. It's something out of it honestly is like a really bad, like, Metal Gear ripoff, or maybe like, I don't know, like a Splinter Cell section that I really wasn't crazy about.
I think that kind of makes sense. Like, I agree that it's not very good. But when you look at the fact that it comes from Shinji Mikami, who, of course, is like one of the heroes of horror and dark, quiet, almost stealth-like games, that kind of makes a little bit of sense that he wanted to edge something like that into the game. Again, I don't think it fits like you said, the ethos of the rest of the game, and the rest of the game is just about like zooming around shooting bad guys. But I guess in a sense, you probably can't get a Shinji Mikami game without a little bit of stealth, I would guess.
Yeah, that's fair. And one funny mistake I did make with that level is, so as is convenient in video games, there are all around you are the exact weapon that you need to complete the level. I made the mistake of multiple times. I picked up all of them at once, and your maximum amount of ammo only had like 12 for the sniper rifle. So I just picked up all of them at once because I'm like, oh, my ammo's gonna keep going up and up. But I didn't check my maximum ammo. So if you pick up a weapon at full ammo, the pickup goes away, and you don't actually increase your ammo. So I was doing the level 2 or 3 times running out of ammo. I'm like, why am I running out of ammo? Why is this not giving me enough ammo? So that's sort of what made it doubly annoying for me. But yeah, the level is not overly complicated. It's very straightforward. There's it throws a couple of cars at you full of enemies, aside from the spotlights. No, that's kind of what stuck out for me. It's nowhere near as annoying as, say, as like the turret sections in the original Dead Space or something like that. But yeah, that is one qualifier that I had there is one other caveat that I had is there will be upgrades. I'm not sure what prompts them, if it's based on like performance or if it's RNG, but it'll just be labeled a giant green box with upgrade as a pickup. And what you'll need to be aware of is when you pick up that upgrade, it will automatically apply to whatever weapon you currently have equipped. So it's not like you'll have a inventory of upgrades and you'll be able to freely apply them. So keep that in mind when you play the game, that you'll want to do that. It took me a few times to figure that out. So you'll really want to know which guns you are your favorite and ones that you want to emphasize. So that's why I say you'll definitely want to be aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few. Again, these are not. I don't know that these are negatives. They're just caveats, and I don't think they should deter anybody from playing. But one is that, like, I do feel like even though the game is just meant to be fun and fluid, there are some like difficulty spikes that you'll be just breezing on through, no problem at all, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, wow, okay, I just got completely wrecked, and either you get overwhelmed or just can't navigate the level correctly. And that's kind of exacerbated with a few things. I mean, you kind of get into that die and do it again kind of gameplay because of the fact that there are points in the game where you have a checkpoint. You don't have like actual physical checkpoints, but like the game recognizes that that's a stopping place. But there are other parts where the checkpoints are so far apart across so many different enemies. You're like, wow, that took me a while to get through, and now I have to go back to the beginning of it if you die. And especially with those boss battles, I think there are checkpoints right at the beginning of the boss battles, but everything ramps up right before you get there. So I would say that that's a caveat, that, you know, to be prepared for that at least. It's not quite as bad as another Platinum game, Nier Automata, where, you know, basically the entire first like hour of the game, you don't hit a checkpoint. And I know that deterred a lot of people from seeing that game through if they died in that first hour. But it is a little bit ridiculous at times where you're like, I cannot believe I'm back basically at the beginning of this level and I have to do it all over again. With that said, it's at least fun to go through it again. But, you know, there's no like painstaking narration you have to sit through again. But probably one of the only big downsides for me about Vanquish is just that you're going to have to replay a few sections probably. If you're playing on normal or hard, I'm positive you're going to die a few times in bad spots.
Yeah, I totally understand that, and I definitely agree. There's a few where, even though there are checkpoints, I think you alluded to this, that there are multiple gameplay sections or like combat arenas, if you will, that are involved within one checkpoint, and the boss battles are, I think, justifiably challenging.
Yeah.
Totally get that, how it can be punishing with when you get into the flow of the gameplay. Like, you know, like you said, you feel overpowered, unstoppable, and it's like, oh crap, I hit a wall and I get my face punched in with the quickness. But yeah, I totally understand that. Were there any other items that you?
Yeah, the only other thing I really have is there are a few sections, at least towards the beginning of the game, where you have to go in and essentially rescue other soldiers, and you spend a lot of time before that, like, or at least I did, clearing out all the enemies around you, so you can go in and, you know, successfully rescue the other soldier. And I would constantly die right after I rescued them, because I would like look around, make sure there was nobody else who could possibly attack me. But as soon as you do pick up those friendlies, more enemies spawn, and they do so without any fanfare. They're just there, like they've always been there. That's the way the game like kind of acts. Until you realize that that's going to be the case, and you're ready to instantly get back into battle mode, you know, that's a little bit punishing. But again, I don't think that's a negative. It's just a caveat that it doesn't matter how much you search your environment. Just new enemies are just going to be there, whether you want them to be or not.
Yeah, I think that's a very ever so subtle, but can be annoying design quirk. And if I recall, that early on level where you have to rescue the Marines, they're captured in like these, I don't know, interrogation torture devices or something. They're in very, very limited geometry areas, so it's not like you can just quickly slide around in a more open area. They're very like on very tight platforms, kind of what you would see in a lot of less mobility reliant third person games. But I had the same reaction, maybe the same reaction you had, where I was like, oh no, I hope this isn't going to be like a constant thing in this game where you have to like rescue Marines in these little tight platform areas. But no, that's just one of the things, one of the levels early on. It's very quick. I think there's like what you said. There's like 3 Marines you have to rescue. It takes like 5 minutes or
Yeah,
something.
in my head, from however long ago, it felt like there was more than that total. But yeah, you may be correct that there's only a few at the beginning.
It always is that way when you play older games and you replay them, 10 whatever years later. You're like, oh, this isn't nearly as time consuming as I thought it was. But again, it's my goal to like mostly gush about a game without spoiling it, which I think we've done a pretty good job of.
There really aren't many flaws in this game to me. It's one of the all-time greats.
No, yeah, it really is. I think it holds up really, really remarkably well. And to sort of bookend with one of the earliest points I raised in this episode is that the mark of a really great game is, I think, ultimately one of the pillars, if not the pillar, is how well does it hold up over time. When you think of the all-time great sort of trailblazing games, like going back to the original Super Mario Brothers, right? You fire that game up, it's just as good as you remember. The gameplay is just as good, and I think this game will certainly stand the test of time. I played it a couple of weeks ago or so. I really no real, again, as we've discussed here, no real major flaws with it. And if you haven't gotten to it, I just would highly recommend getting to it, if for no other reason than to remember like when Platinum was at their peak. And fingers crossed, maybe they'll get back to that. They'll find a creative fire under their bellies. They won't necessarily have a Shinji Mikami type to really steer the ship, but I do hope that they get back to this sort of game. So thank you so much, Ben, for coming on, and I will certainly link your video on the game, which again put me over the top to actually play it. And you can play this game pretty much on every major platform.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
I played it on Steam. The PS4, I think it got a PS4, Xbox One remaster version, I
think
believe.
they paired it. Did they pair it with Bayonetta?
With Bayonetta.
Okay. Yeah,
they did, because I got the physical version of that. But thank you so much, Ben, and who knows? Maybe I'll try to get other high-profile guests eventually. Just a matter of
high profile.
Yeah, high profile. Yeah, high profile.
I don't know,
celebrities.
I don't know, I'm high profile. Well, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, thank you to everyone out there. And again, just please play this game if you haven't. Talk to others who've played it, and please play the game. Yeah. Just play it. That's all I ask. 5 hours, 6 hours. Thank you again. A final thank you to Ben. Thank you to all the fine audience who's listening, and maybe you'll understand why I chose this game, and you won't have any more audience pushback. We will silence the haters. So thank you again, and we will see you next time.